Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. A reliable mother of three misses a pickup on Mother's Day weekend. Her phone stops moving. By Monday, her SUV is located in a Home Depot lot she doesn't use. In Nassau County, Florida, that sequence isn't noise. It's a signal. This report follows the record as it exists. Time-stamped movements, camera windows, scene processing, waste stream tracking, laboratory returns, then the courtroom. One case, one ending. Jolene Cummings finishes a shift at Tangle's Hair Salon in Yulee on Saturday, May 12, 2018. The plan is ordinary. Family time, a routine she keeps. When that routine breaks, the first responders do the same thing they always do. Confirm last known contact, document the timeline, preserve what can be preserved. Family files a missing person report on Monday, May 14th. A short distance away, a Ford SUV linked to Jolene appears where she's not known to park. Cameras become priority. Who left the vehicle and when? We do not claim there is no scene. At this stage, scene status is undetermined pending forensic work inside the salon. That distinction matters. Early decisions that presume too much create blind spots. The aim is simple. Lock what is known, isolate what is unknown, and avoid contaminating either. Perimeter canvass begins with the parking lot and adjacent businesses. Investigators request available surveillance and establish collection windows. They check point-of-sale receipts near the relevant times and map potential approach and exit paths to and from the salon and the Home Depot lot. If the SUV was moved, a human moved it. If a human moved it, something placed that person in the right place at the right time. This is not guesswork. It's geometry built from clocks and lenses. The first 5 minutes of any case like this decide retention of the public's attention and of fragile data. Footage overwrites. Witness memory decays. Electronics roll off their buffers. Getting to the right cameras and the right devices fast is part of the outcome. You'll see that again later when the back of the salon becomes more important than the front. A note on tone. This is not a story about feelings. It's a story about findings. We acknowledge the family's position with respect, but we hold the line on evidence. If something isn't in the official record, it won't be here. If a detail has not been verified, we won't use it to steer you. The question you should be asking right now is the same one investigators asked. If something happened inside the salon, how did the outside start talking first? There is a reason we begin with perimeter and vehicle before forensics. The outside edges are easier to fix in time. A car placed, a camera angle, a receipt timestamp. Interior processing demands method, entry logs, photographs, swabs, and chain of custody. We'll go inside next, and when we do, the classification of this case will shift from absence to evidence. If you live in a quiet town, you already know this. Disappearances don't just take a person. They cut into routines, school runs, shift changes, Sunday habits. That is why procedure exists. When you strip away speculation and keep only what can be proven, a pattern usually remains. Sometimes it aligns too cleanly, sometimes that's the problem. Entry was controlled and recorded. Investigators re-entered Tangle's Hair Salon with one objective: determine whether this is a last seen location or an evidentiary scene. Before a single item moved, the team completed wide to tight photography, overall room views, mid-range frames tying objects to landmarks, then close-ups with scales. Only after baselines were preserved did they begin screening. Presumptive tests for blood were applied to selected low wall areas, chair bases, and floor seams that showed irregular discoloration under white light. Positive reactions authorized targeted collection. Technicians marked grids, documented positions, and opened sterile swabs in view of the camera. Each swab, cutting or lifting, received an item number, timestamp, and initials. Chain of custody started in the room, not at the lab, because paperwork is part of the evidence. A trash liner beneath the sink held wipes and paper products with faint staining inconsistent with routine salon use. Items were separated, air-dried when needed, and packaged in paper to prevent degradation. Nearby, several high-strength cleaning agents showed recent use. Labels and barcodes were photographed. Lot numbers and container conditions may later tie to purchase records or timing. None of this implies intent. It preserves context, so the laboratory can interpret results without guesswork. Alternate light sources were used to locate transfer and wipe patterns not visible under ambient light. Along a baseboard and a cabinet edge, Interrupted streaks suggested directional movement rather than incidental drips. The team did not narrate motive. They logged geometry, angles, lengths, and breakpoints, then selected additional swabs from transition zones, workstation to floor, floor to drain, workstation to rear access. Water traps and drains were sampled using sterile techniques, with tool changes between sites to prevent cross-contamination. Textiles and tools within proximity, towels, capes, a clipper guard, a comb jar, were inventoried and triaged. Items with visible staining or plausible secondary transfer were reserved for DNA screening. Hard surface tools were photographed for microstaining and packaged accordingly. This approach reflects standard practice. Start with the highest probability substrates, then expand if early lab returns justify it. Limited budgets and finite processing capacity are realities. Prioritization is part of good science. The lead investigator recorded a classification change in the case log. Evidence of blood was documented in the salon consistent with a violent event. That sentence changes search posture. The operation now requires outbound mapping, how material could have left the room, and coordination with exterior assets. Before sealing the scene, the team traced practical egress routes, front door to parking, and more important, workstation line of travel toward the rear access and waste points. Contact surfaces on those paths, door push plates, low cabinet corners, a mop handle collar, were tested or taped for trace if indicated. To protect future testimony, the team performed a brief on-site redundancy check. 2 personnel verified item counts against the photo log, then compared chain of custody entries with the scene diagram. Seals were signed and dated. This audit step is what withstood cross-examination in other cases. It should withstand it here. If viewers take anything from this process, it's that careful documentation is as valuable as the sample itself. Communities feel the loss. Courts require the proof. Notice what we are not doing. We are not naming a perpetrator, and we are not inferring motive from chemicals, wipes, or patterns. Those items indicate activity within a relevant window. The lab will decide identity and source. Today's advance is narrow but decisive. The salon is no longer only where Jolene Cummings was last seen. It is a scene with collected biological evidence and defined exit vectors. The outside evidence you heard about earlier, vehicle placement and camera windows, will be set beside these interior findings. If the pattern holds, the next steps will make sense. Track movements behind the building and follow what the waste system can tell us. One more operational note aimed at viewers who work in facilities or retail. Preserve your DVR immediately if an employee disappears. Many systems overwrite within days. Early preservation can save a case. In towns that value routine, the fastest way to honor a missing person is to secure the records that can show what happened. We leave the salon under seal, evidence logged and prepared for transport. The case file now has a fixed interior anchor and a reason to look hard at the back lot. The next move is outbound. Bags, timing, and the route from a private room to a public waste stream. Tangle's hair salon was sealed, evidence logged, and the focus shifted to the area that could answer what the interior could not: the service alley and the shared dumpster corral. Detectives obtained retention commitments from every business on the strip. No overwrites, no routine maintenance deletions. A maintenance-mounted camera with a fixed view of the corral became the anchor. Its clock was verified against network time so later testimony wouldn't argue about minutes. Within the defined window after closing, the footage shows a single individual exiting the salon's rear door multiple times, carrying large black trash bags toward the dumpster. The bags hang heavy, the carrier's posture changes under weight, and disposal is deliberate rather than casual. A cleaning caddy appears in one pass, then is absent in the next. The camera does not reveal contents, it confirms behavior. That difference matters in court. Behavior ties the interior scene to an outbound path. Route documentation followed. Investigators pulled the hauler's run sheet, the stop order for that corral, and the transfer station routing for that day's collection. Way slips, vehicle GPS, and driver logs were copied and secured. This paperwork allows a landfill team to pinpoint which compacted loads correspond to the salon's dumpster within the relevant hours. Without those slips, a search is a guess. With them, a search is a grid. The second angle came from a diagonal corner camera that partially covered the walkway from the rear door to the corral. Analysts matched clothing, gait, and the interval between trips. They also confirmed that no other employee or delivery crossed that corridor during the critical span. Occupancy cues. Lights out across neighboring units, no scheduled deliveries, no backdoor smoke breaks, reduced variables. When defense later asks whether heavy trash could be explained by routine salon cleanup, the record will show frequency and apparent load that exceeds ordinary end-of-day disposal. Physical contact points were tested. The interior push plate and knob on the rear door were swabbed for DNA or trace after mid- and close-range photographs with scales. The exterior latch, the gate hinge of the corral, and a narrow rub mark at the top of the dumpster wall were documented. Under oblique lighting, that rub showed a low, dull streak consistent with a heavy bag lifted and pivoted over the edge. Consistent with is the correct phrase. It does not presume contents. It aligns shape to action. A quick reconciliation check compared interior consumables to exterior activity. The number of trips captured on video did not align with a typical Saturday night close for a salon of this size. That discrepancy isn't a conclusion, it's direction. It pointed resources to waste chain forensics while the lab processed high-yield swabs from the interior. The backlot sequence also brought a scheduling fact into the file. A recently hired co-worker's time card overlapped the closing hours under review. Employment records placed that person on site. The video's clothing and build appeared consistent with that worker during the window. In a professional report, you record the match and stop there. Identity questions, legal names, aliases, history belong to later chapters and courtroom foundations, not narration here. Securing the waste stream required coordination. Collection trucks move quickly from corral to transfer station to regional landfill. Investigators requested a hold on specific loads identified by stop order and time. A landfill operations chief designated a cell sector where those loads would likely be tipped. The search plan called for staging equipment, assigning safety spotters, and using layered screening, visual inspection, raking, then targeted sifting based on known item shapes or materials documented from the salon, for example, certain liners, towel types, or packaging. Why escalate to that level before lab results return? Because time degrades evidence in a landfill. Heat, compaction, and additional tipping can destroy or disperse trace. If the paperwork is sound and the time window tight, you search now and correlate later. The interior scene does not lose value while you do so. It gains context when outbound items are recovered, or when the absence of recovery, coupled with documentation of disposal, becomes part of the state's chain. The team also addressed a common defense theme before it appeared: contamination. They documented PPE use in the alley, tool changes between swabs, and separate packaging of exterior samples. They photographed each seal, then logged custody transfers. That level of detail is not bureaucratic noise. It's how you prevent a strong tape from becoming a weak exhibit. If a case draws national attention years later, these pages will be read line by line. There is a human reason to stay exact out here. Families don't need suspense, they need certainty. In communities where routine is the anchor, certainty comes from clocks and routes, not rumors. The exterior work you're hearing now respects that. A room turned into a scene connected to a path, and a path translated into a search location measured in feet, not miles. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. You mend that fabric with proof. By the time the exterior collection wrapped, the case file had 3 synchronized tracks: interior biological evidence under seal, outbound movement captured on video, and a mapped waste route with holds on the relevant loads. The next step moves to the landfill, where those loads become a grid and the grid becomes a dig. This is where no-body cases either gather momentum or stall. The difference is almost always paperwork and timing. The backlot footage and the route paperwork gave us direction. The waste system turned that direction into coordinates. Detectives secured the hauler's run sheet for the pickup that serviced the dumpster behind Tangle's hair salon, along with GPS pings, scale tickets, and the transfer station itinerary for that shift. Those documents do the quiet work a camera can't. They tell you which load carried what, when that load was compacted, where it was tipped, and how much it weighed at each step. In cases built without recovered remains, the chain that matters most is often measured in pounds and minutes. Here's how the path translates. A rear alley dumpster is emptied into a front-loading truck. That truck compacts and travels a fixed route, recorded by onboard telemetry and confirmed by driver logs. It then delivers to a transfer station where loads are aggregated by destination. From the transfer station, tractor-trailers carry compacted material to a regional landfill, in this case, the site that receives Nassau County commercial waste on the relevant night. Each handoff generates a time mark: lift at the corral, weigh in at transfer, weigh out, gate entry at landfill, and tip into a designated cell. Put those marks beside the backlot window and you can narrow the search to a manageable section of ground. Operations at the landfill are structured. A cell is an engineered pit with liners and lifts. Tipping happens along a working face, then a dozer pushes and covers. To find anything in that environment, investigators must get ahead of the next push. That's why timing outruns comfort in these cases. Heat, compaction, and added loads destroy trace. With the hauler's stops confirmed and the transport schedule locked, the assistant operations manager flagged the most likely tractor-trailer numbers and the approximate tip bay used when those units arrived. Beyond that, let the team draw a grid. Not the whole cell, just the slice of it that corresponds to the hours and vehicles identified on the paperwork. Search protocols at a landfill read like aviation checklists. Safety briefing, PPE verification, equipment staging, spotter assignment, and a dig plan signed by both law enforcement and site management. The grid is laid with flags and tape, each square labeled to preserve context. Excavation proceeds by lift, not by guess. One layer, exposed, raked, examined, then bagged if items of interest appear. Items of interest doesn't mean sensational finds. It means things that match what the investigation already knows could exist. Specific liners used by the salon, towel types, packaging shapes, or objects consistent with tools or containers documented during the interior search. Each item is photographed in situ, placed in clean evidence paper or boxes, sealed and logged by number against the grid coordinates. Chain of custody starts in dirt, not back at the station. Digital tools help. If the tractor-trailers that carried the loads have telematics, you can anchor ETA and gate times to seconds. Scale houses keep timestamps that reconcile truck IDs to weights. Those weights tell you if a truck arrived light or heavy relative to its route, and whether a second pass occurred that night. Even when a camera misses a face, paperwork rarely misses a load. The strength of this step is not mystery, it's math. There is a human dimension here worth stating plainly. Families want certainty, not choreography. Grid searches deliver certainty when they're disciplined. They either recover material that ties back to a room, or they recover nothing but still fix the disposal story to a clock and a place. Either outcome moves a case forward. In towns where routine is the baseline, certainty builds trust, because it shows that people's habits, even their trash schedules, can anchor a timeline when a person can't speak. While the dig team worked the grid, the case agent coordinated with the lab on prioritization. High-yield swabs and cuttings from the salon had already been expedited. The point was not to wait on one stream at the expense of the other. Waste stream searches are perishable. Laboratory extraction is methodical. Running them in parallel prevented the calendar from deciding the case. The agent also pushed a narrow request to retailers for purchase records on specialty cleaning products whose barcodes were documented inside the salon. If timestamps align, purchase before close, residue after close, that becomes a clean link in the chain. It's not a motive, it's a bridge between acts. A quick note about contamination control in a landfill setting, because defense will go there. Field teams changed gloves between items, used separate tools per grid when feasible, and kept a clean, dirty line around the staging area. Evidence packaging remained paper-based to breathe. Seals were dated and initialed. Any item wet from decomposition was air-dried under supervision before boxing. Those steps sound procedural until cross-examination turns them into the centerpiece. In this space, paperwork equals credibility. By day's end, the grid delivered what these operations usually deliver: a small number of potential items of interest bagged and labeled. More importantly, a documented slice of ground that the case can refer to with confidence. The interior scene and the exterior path now had a third partner, a mapped cell in a regional landfill tied to tickets and times. Taken together, the triangle is simple. A workstation where blood was collected, a rear corridor where heavy bags moved, and a grid where those bags most likely became part of the waste stream. Whether the grid yields a decisive object or simply narrows the field, The chain is intact. If you've ever wondered why some cases seem to move without eyewitnesses, this is the reason. Systems remember. Trucks, scales, and gatehouses keep a better diary than most people. When investigators listen to those systems and match their entries to a scene, the result is less dramatic than television, but it is more durable. In towns like these, that durability is what gives families something to hold. Before the team cleared, a final reconciliation matched grid labels to the hauler's documents. No gaps, no missing squares, no unlogged bags. The site supervisor signed the joint log. Evidence was transferred to agency custody. The next phase returns to the lab and to custody decisions informed by the totality of the record. The story does not jump ahead, it moves in sequence: interior, exterior, route, cell. From here we turn to what the laboratory said when those sealed envelopes and boxes arrived. Daylight at the landfill is not drama, it's measurement. The grid was already flagged, the equipment staged, and the loads linked to the route behind Tangle's hair salon. What mattered now was conversion, turning a section of compacted waste into a documented evidence field. Crews worked lift by lift. A spotter called depth. An operator skimmed inches, not feet. Each exposure was photographed, bagged, or dismissed based on match criteria established before the first rake touched the cell. Match criteria sound simple because they have to hold up in court. Investigators looked for what the case could plausibly put there. Liners consistent with those stocked at the salon, towel stock common to that business type, and objects with dimensions that could align with collection points inside the room. Nothing speculative, nothing cinematic. When an item resembled a target class, it was photographed in place, lifted into clean paper, sealed, and assigned a grid coordinate. That coordinate lets a jury see where it came from and how it relates to surrounding finds. Time destroys detail in a landfill. Heat and pressure smear ink, deform plastics, and move trace from surface to surface. That's why the team used layered screening. First, a visual pass for shape and color. Second, a texture check for absorbent materials. Third, a quick chemical screen if staining appeared. Any item with biological potential was set aside for controlled air drying back at the evidence facility. Drying racks were prepped, labels pre-written, and evidence clerks briefed, because delays are how cross-contamination happens. Across the grid, items of interest were exactly that, potential. A black liner with seam welds matching the brand documented in the salon supply closet. A towel fragment with a color band common to salon capes and drying towels. A small piece of flexible plastic that could belong to a handled cleaning bottle consistent with the barcoded products photographed inside. None of these objects tell a story by themselves, but they do something almost as important. They keep the disposal timeline intact. When the defense demands, "How do you know anything from that room reached this cell?" the answer is not theory. It's a clock, a truck ID, and a grid square. While the field team focused on recovery, the case agent ran the parallel track: transaction records. Requests to suppliers and nearby retailers, pursued through standard legal channels, sought receipts for heavy-duty liners and high-strength cleaning agents of the types photographed at the salon. If a purchase time falls before closing and residue appears after closing, the record closes distance between pre-incident preparation and post-incident cleanup. That is not motive. It is sequence. Jurors follow sequence. One element can stall a case like this: missing or mismatched time codes. Here, the landfill kept accurate gate times, and the transfer station produced readable scale tickets. The hauler's telemetry reconciled with driver log entries. No gaps. That alignment allowed the team to stop short of searching the entire cell and stay within the targeted zone. Precision matters for another reason: credibility. If investigators treat a landfill like a narrative set, defense counsel will treat every recovered item like a prop. Treat it like an engineered system, and the paperwork becomes its own witness. Human stakes do not fade just because we're talking about plastic seams and waste slips. Families want certainty. Communities want to know that routine, trash routes, DVR backups, store logs can still anchor a case when eyewitnesses fail or never existed. Certainty here is incremental. It is a bag seam that matches a closet inventory. It is a towel band that matches a workstation. It is an object shape that matches a product recorded in the room. Put enough increments together and you have a chain that does not rely on confession or rumor. By the end of the operational window, the team had packaged a limited set of items for lab processing. Limited is not a weakness, it's discipline. Everything taken had a defined reason to be tested, and everything left behind was documented in context with photographs and grid notes. The site supervisor signed off on the closure of the dig for that sector. Any reopening would require a new scope and new paperwork. Evidence moved to agency custody, logged against the same chain that started inside the salon. When you hear the phrase, "no body homicide," this is how prosecutors defend it, by showing that every link from workstation to cell is documented and each link survived challenge. Before leaving the site, the agent made one more reconciliation. Outbound trips on the rear lot video, the corral pickup time, transfer way in, transfer way out, and landfill gate entry. The sequence held. No surprise detours, no missing hours, no unaccounted secondary runs. A clean sequence does not mean investigators stop asking questions. It means they can ask better ones. What did the lab see on the most promising swabs from the salon? Did any landfill recoveries carry biological trace that could be tied to the interior scene? Were any tool marks or micro-residues consistent with the items logged at collection? This is where the story leaves dirt and enters glass and steel, the lab. Analysts will speak through reports, not through cameras. If a swab or a towel fragment carries DNA consistent with the victim, that is a result the jury can understand in a sentence. If an item carries no trace, that answer is still valuable. It narrows where to look and where not to. In towns that value routine, cases often hinge on whether people did simple things fast, preserved video, held loads, moved evidence under seal. Those choices were made here. We will not preview conclusions that belong to laboratory reports. What we can say is that the case now rests on three synchronized points: a salon classified as an evidentiary scene, an exterior pattern that carried heavy bags to a known dumpster, and a gridded cell matched to that dumpster by ticket and time. The next move is to put results on the table, what the lab confirmed, what it excluded, and how those findings shaped the first custody decisions that followed. With the landfill grid secured and logged, the next move split into two tracks, scientific and legal. The scientific track began the minute those sealed envelopes from Tangle's hair salon hit intake. High-yield swabs from floor seams and low wall lines, cuttings from a towel and a cape, drain samples, and select tool surfaces. The legal track opened with a narrow custodial action tied to the victim's SUV, Grand Theft Auto, giving investigators lawful space to recover clothing, footwear, and personal effects for screening without jumping ahead on charges. At the lab, triage followed a set order. Presumptive hits from the scene were confirmed by serology, then sent to DNA extraction. Profile development prioritized the strongest substrates first. Partials were held until the major donors were known. Results came back in a sequence jurors can understand. Blood consistent with Jolene Cummings on specific salon cuttings, and crucially, on a pair of socks and boots recovered through the custody step. The footwear was documented, photographed, and tested under clean protocols. Transfer patterns on the uppers matched the kind of low-angle contact you'd expect if someone walked through a contaminated area. That's not narration, it's geometry. One packaged item required careful handling. A cutting implement permitted into evidence later as context. Its testing was limited and disciplined to preserve surfaces for future examination. The takeaway wasn't spectacle, it was the fabric of a chain. Interior biological material links to the victim. Exterior items obtained during custody show the same biological source. Both sit inside a timeline already fixed by cameras, hauler logs, and scale tickets. A case like this doesn't need a speech, it needs alignment. Digital traces complemented the biology. Time data from the victim's phone bracketed the last movement window. Store transaction records for heavy-duty liners and cleaning agents were returned under lawful request and cross-checked against the salon's closing period. When timestamps place purchase before close and residue after, a straight line forms between preparation and cleanup. That line doesn't argue motive, it locks sequence. During this phase, the person whose schedule overlapped closing hours remained described the way a professional report would, by role and presence. The custody entry reflects the vehicle count. The lab entry reflects biological findings. There's no rhetorical leap between them. If a defense asks how the scene connects to the person in custody, the answer is straightforward. Trace on footwear, socks, and relevant items, collected, sealed, and tested, matches the victim. Everything else is paperwork and testimony. Community members often ask what helps most when a case becomes laboratory-driven. The answer is early preservation, DVR pulls, receipts, and a clean chain of custody. Those steps keep emotion from becoming the only thing families have. Here, they preserved options. The science could speak, and the legal track could move without overreach. By the time these returns were briefed, the file held 4 synchronized anchors, an interior scene with confirmed blood, a rear lot path documented on video, a landfill cell mapped by ticket and time, and lab results placing the victim's blood on items tied to the custody step. That's the difference between suspicion and a state's theory that can stand in court. Next comes the architecture of a no-body homicide, how prosecutors connect these anchors into one chain and why a jury can convict without recovered remains. A case without recovered remains rises or falls on whether separate facts lock into one story. Here, the anchors are fixed. Inside Tangle's hair salon, blood was documented, photographed, and collected under full chain of custody. Outside, rear lot surveillance captured multiple heavy bag trips from the salon to the shared dumpster within the relevant window. The hauler's run sheet, GPS, scale tickets, and transfer itinerary mapped those bags from corral to truck, from truck to transfer, and from transfer to a specific landfill cell. In that cell, a controlled grid yielded a limited set of items of interest consistent with what the room could have produced. In parallel, the lab confirmed the victim's blood on selected interior cuttings and on socks and boots obtained during a narrow custody step tied to the victim's SUV. None of these pieces is dramatic standing alone. Together, they function the way a timeline should, without gaps. Prosecutors build an architecture around 5 questions. Was there a violent event? Did material leave the scene? Where did it go? What ties a specific person to that movement? What places the victim in the biological record outside the room? The answers are sequential. The salon blood and wipe patterns establish the event. The backlot footage establishes departure. The waste stream paperwork establishes destination. The footwear traces and seized items collected after a lawful grand theft auto arrest establish contact with the victim's blood outside the room. Purchase timestamps for heavy liners and high-strength cleaners align preparation and cleanup on the same calendar. The victim's phone activity stops when the sequence starts. That alignment is not a flourish. It is the basis for asking a jury to find that a homicide occurred and that the responsible party acted to conceal it. Defense strategies in no-body prosecutions usually press the same points: contamination, alternative innocuous explanations, and the absence of a recovered body. The record here anticipates those. Contamination is addressed by documentation, glove changes, sealed packaging, separate tool use, clean dirty lines, and signatures that match photographs and item logs. Innocuous explanations do not fit the weight, frequency, and timing of the outbound trips, nor do they match the disparity between typical salon closeout and what the cameras recorded. As for the absence of remains, the law does not require recovery when the totality proves death and criminal agency beyond a reasonable doubt. Identity questions stay in bounds. A coworker present at closing appears on the rear lot timeline. Their schedule, clothing, and build correspond to the person making the trips. Alias history, where admissible, enters for the limited purpose the court allows, to explain identification, not to inflame. The point for a jury is narrower. Does the combination of interior biology, exterior movement, documented waste routing, and victim blood on seized clothing and footwear form a continuous chain connected to one person's access and actions? If it does, the lack of a body does not defeat proof. It defines the methods used to hide it. Behind every exhibit number is why these cases matter to communities like Nassau County. Routine, cameras that were saved, tickets that were printed, receipts that were pulled, gave investigators the tools to speak for someone who could not. That is the quiet standard of justice in a no-body case: disciplined collection, precise timing, and the refusal to let what wasn't found erase what was. The record went in the way good cases do, clean and in sequence. Jurors saw the salon photographs and item logs first, then heard serology and DNA testimony identifying Jolene Cummings' blood on select interior cuttings. They watched the rear lot footage that documented heavy bag trips in the relevant window and then followed the paperwork that carried those bags from the dumpster to a specific landfill cell: run sheet, GPS points, scale tickets, transfer itinerary. Laboratory witnesses explained how socks and boots seized during a narrow custody step tied to the victim's SUV carried the same biological source as the scene. Purchased timestamps for heavy-duty liners and strong cleaners framed preparation before closing and residue after. The phone timeline marked when silence began. The law required 3 answers in a no-body case: proof of death, proof of criminal agency, and proof of connection. Death was inferred from the blood volume and cleanup indicators at Tangle's hair salon, the immediate digital stop, and the rapid waste routing that followed. Criminal agency was supported by directed disposal and concealment conduct. Connection was established through access at closing, the outbound movements, and biological transfer on seized items. The defense pressed contamination and innocent use theories, chain of custody, tool changes, seals, and matched timestamps held. On December 9, 2021, the jury found Kimberly Kessler guilty of first-degree murder. On January 27, 2022, the court imposed life without parole. Nothing since has altered that judgment. Coverage in 2024-2025 has revisited the record. Post-trial filings did not change the verdict or the sentence. What remains is the reason communities like Nassau County, Florida invest in routine. Cameras that aren't overwritten, haulers that keep accurate tickets, labs that speak through reports, not speculation. Families deserve certainty. Systems make it possible. This case advanced not because someone confessed, but because ordinary infrastructure remembered. Room to door to corral, corral to scale, scale to cell, cell to lab, and lab to the courtroom. If you take one thing from this, let it be practical. Preserve video fast, keep receipts, document custody. Those steps won't replace a life, but they turn rumors into facts and facts into justice. After walking this case with you, I'm reminded that justice in America isn't magic. It's habits. Report early, save the footage, keep the paper trail, show up for one another. That's how quiet towns stay strong. What system in your city most needs attention? Cameras, evidence handling, or public awareness? If you were on the jury, which link in the chain convinced you most? Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from. And if this didn't work for you, say why and where you saw it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Creepy Crime Story so you don't miss the next case.